Hi, everyone. It is Monday, August 21st, 2017 at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, and this is Admissions Live. I'm your host, Nicole Lentini, and on today's live broadcast, we're talking about the Excelsior Scholarship in New York State and its impact in the admissions and counseling world in its upcoming first year. Admissions Live is part of the Higher Ed Live network. Our episodes offer you the direct access to the best and brightest minds in education. Be a part of our live broadcast by sharing your knowledge. Participate in today's discussion by tweeting at us with the hashtag HigherEdLive. All of our episodes are free and easy to access in the video archives at higheredlive.com, or take Higher Ed Live with you on the go by subscribing to the podcast. Today's episode is made possible by NRCCUA. Admissions Live is sponsored by NRCCUA, producers of the weekly EduVentures Wake Up Call newsletter. Subscribe to get weekly updates on the most pressing issues and trends in higher education. And we're tweeting out a link right now or in about a minute to be able to share that with you. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a digital-first agency committed to tailored solutions that drive real results. Do you need help getting full buy-in for a website redesign? A higher education website checkup with M. Stoner will provide objective feedback and give you and your team a clear roadmap for improving your site. We're tweeting out a link shortly so you can learn more. Without further ado, I'm very excited to introduce the show today, and I appreciate all the viewers who are checking us out and maybe missing a little bit of the first few bits of the eclipse. I know we're competing with a pretty big deal out there, so we appreciate those of you tuning in today. The Excelsior Scholarship will make New York the first state to include 4-year public schools in the free tuition program. Targeting middle-class families and individuals with incomes of $125,000 per year or less, the program has been hailed both as innovative and is doomed to fail. So we're curious if this is a move in the right direction. And my guest today is Joe D'Angelo, a Karl Marx Advisors partner and an education industry and restructuring veteran. So Joe, I'm excited to have you on the show today. We've chatted a bit over the phone and online, but I'm really excited to have you on today. So could you share a little bit more about kind of your background and how you ended up on the show today?
Yes, thank you, Nicole. It's a pleasure to be on the podcast with you, talk about the Excelsior program. As you mentioned, I'm a partner at Karl Marx Advisors. We are a turnaround, restructuring, and investment banking firm headquartered in New York. We focus on middle market companies. And since 2010, we have been focusing on the post-secondary education sector, where a trend has started with declining enrollments and increasing operating deficits. And there are a number of small liberal arts colleges in the country that are struggling with lower enrollments and increased discounting, which is driving operating deficits. And many of these schools just don't have the endowment to help them bridge through that liquidity crunch. And so we've been working with a number of schools, helping them reduce the operating deficit, trying to increase enrollments, and develop a strategic plan and implement a strategic plan because the alternative is unacceptable, namely going out of business.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we in higher ed, and I'm sure especially in New York, appreciate the work that you're doing to help them keep ahead of the wave, so to speak, that we're seeing in higher ed right now. Yeah. So I kind of gave a little bit of background of the scholarship at the start of the broadcast, but for those who are unfamiliar with this scholarship, with this program in New York, can you give a little bit more information about really what it's all about and what that's looking like for New York schools?
Sure. The program is titled the Excelsior Program. Governor Cuomo introduced it in the spring. And it's meant to offer the opportunity for free tuition to New York State residents to either a state university or city university. The program is tuition only. It does not address room and board. It's what they call a last dollar program. So federal aid that you may get from the government, Pell Grants, or even the New York Tuition Assistance Program gets applied first. And if there is a gap, if there's a remaining portion of the tuition that the student still owes, the Excelsior program would be applied to the remaining tuition uncovered. But it has several strings attached.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be a New York State resident for at least 12 months prior to applying. Have to be a full-time student. Full-time student means you need to average 30 credits per year. You need to try to enroll in at least 12 credits. If you fall below that, the program could be terminated and you would have to pay back a semester of school. But you also have to maintain a grade level. And after you graduate, you have to work. You have to remain in the state of New York and work for an equivalent number of years that you receive the aid. So if you receive 3 years of aid, you would have to stay in the state for 3 years. And it is targeted at middle-class families, although it was originally positioned as an opportunity for lower-income families. We have to see if it actually meets that target.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know when we were speaking about it and kind of framing out our conversation today, you seemed a little unsure if it was really going to ultimately meet that goal. Because there's a lot of other factors, I think, at stake here that maybe don't initially get considered into that overall goal of the scholarship.
Mm-hmm.
So as we're kind of sitting here today, it's about a month ago that the start of it rolled out, right?
Yeah, the applications were recently reported that they had received about 75,000 applications. For the initial rollout, the state was expecting about 23,000 applications to turn out to be eligible.
Mm-hmm.
They still think with the 75,000 applications that a number of the qualifications will cause applicants to be ineligible, and they've funded about $87 million for the first applications. So it seems to be oversubscribed for
Mm-hmm.
the first year. And from what I understand, it's been predominantly existing students currently enrolled in SUNY or CUNY schools. So I think we'll have to wait until maybe the spring semester or next year to see how all of the schools look at it and may or may not take advantage of it, including private schools.
Absolutely. Yeah. I know it's in many ways too early to tell what really is going to happen. You know, we're just in the initial rollout, but I think those numbers are really interesting to see, you know, kind of to see where it's starting at and what that looks like at the end of the year, right? And kind of how that sort of shakes out who's still eligible, what that looks like, and how that rolls into their first year.
We've been watching the numbers. I'll tell you, for me personally, it's a little underwhelming. There are about 650,000 full-time students in the SUNY CUNY system,
Mm-hmm.
and they're only expecting about 30,000 eligible applications. When you look at the household income, has to be below 100,000 this year, increasing to 110,000 next year, and 125,000 in 2019. And so that knocks out a number of applicants. They also have to maintain 30 credits, and believe it or not, there's a large percentage of students that would not be able to carry that much of a workload. You also have to graduate in 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so only about 50% of the students even graduate in the SUNY system. And so some students, I think, are looking at it saying, well, it might be more binding and it might be more prohibitive for me to take those extra tuition dollars than to not accept the Excelsior program and have more flexibility. In terms of the rollout itself, Nicole, it's a little bit problematic. It was probably rolled out too late.
Mm-hmm.
Being rolled out in the spring, many students were already not only notified of where they were accepted, but they may have already received their financial aid package.
Right.
And the HESC, the Higher Education Service Corp, is processing the applications. The first step is the HESC has to qualify the household income,
Mm-hmm.
and then the school needs to verify eligibility in terms of the number of credits. And so the process is taking a little bit for students to actually find out if they're eligible and have won the award.
Yeah.
But it's August 21st, and most schools, you have to pay for your classes.
Yeah.
And if you
Absolutely.
don't pay for your classes, everything you enrolled for will be dropped. So there's some kinks in how this is getting rolled out. It was probably rolled out too late. Not enough schools could really assess what the impact would be. And students are having some issues where they may have to pay for classes just to make sure that they can show up on the first day, and then find out how the Excelsior program may reimburse them or get applied. So it's not as smooth as you would ultimately like the rollout of a program like this.
Right.
But nonetheless, it looks like a number of students have applied for it.
Well, and it's interesting. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, but I hadn't even been thinking about it as far as these students incoming to college right now. I was thinking of, being in the admissions world, I feel like we're always 1 year ahead. So we're just kind of those classes. But you make a really great point for something that's supposed to be positively impacting this incoming class too. That's too late to have rolled that out. You're right. These students should have probably paid most of their bills already. They may have aligned other scholarships. I can see why they'd say, I don't know enough about this, and it's coming in at such a late stage. Doesn't even make sense for me to take these scholarship dollars when there's so many binds on it where, they may have already been figuring out these other pieces. So I can see why that could have been messy for this incoming class of 2021 if they're graduating in 4 years. That's interesting. And then, so looking forward, what are, you've talked about some really big roadblocks, especially for this incoming class, and you've highlighted a few, but what are some others as far as now it moving forward for future classes? What are the roadblocks you've seen that have already been brought up as concerns? What are other things you're thinking about that might be issues that the program is going to need to combat?
I think the biggest disconnect for me is when you're talking about headlines that say free tuition, it implies something really grandiose and kind of a game changer.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at how many students were actually talking about being able to take advantage of it, it seems in my mind to be missing the mark. If you stated an objective that said you want to make college more affordable if you wanted to make college more affordable to a number of students in the state, then you could structure this a different way, like, for example, to address room and board.
Mm-hmm.
This is only going to impact tuition. We already have a wonderful tuition program in the state, the TAP program. And so it's not really addressing what is probably the primary issue in the country, which school is getting more expensive and students and families have less ability to pay.
Absolutely.
So I think the challenges in going forward is that the program may come under increased criticism, that it's really not making a difference.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at how many students fall out due to the onerous eligibility requirements, it doesn't really seem to have a big impact. There's a downside to everything.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that bothers me is it doesn't seem very well thought through in terms of the impact it's going to have on private colleges. Yeah. And New York State has a lot of private colleges. They have about 134 private colleges. Of those, about 96 are eligible to opt into a similar program called the Enhanced Tuition Award Program. And so not many private colleges, only about 30 of the 96 actually enrolled. some of the issues preventing others from doing so was it just was rolled out so late they really could not, they didn't have the time to figure out what the impact and affordability would be.
Right.
And I mentioned affordability because the state will put up $3,000 and the school has to match it.
Mm-hmm.
The school also has to leave the tuition frozen for 4 years, cannot increase the tuition to that student. And then the student still has to meet and maintain all of the other eligibility requirements for the program to not be defaulted and turn into a loan.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for some schools, private schools, it could be a way of maybe growing your enrollments, because for 10 or 15 students, the word free is such a difference to them that you want to be able to say, I'll match that program and not lose those students. But I think overall, it's going to negatively impact the private schools, whether they opt in or they don't, because competing with the perception of free is going to be a big challenge. And to the extent that the state university and city universities see an increase in enrollments, that's likely to primarily come from private New York State colleges and universities.
Mm-hmm.
And as we said, they're struggling in the first place.
Right.
And so this is going to be another challenge. And for some of these schools, if they lose 20, 25, 35 enrollments, you're going to see economic dislocation in the state, because those schools are going to have to eliminate certain faculty, certain staff positions. You're going to see jobs being eliminated as these private school enrollments continue to decrease. At some point, you'll see schools eventually close, or you'll start to see them consolidate or merge.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's likely to be some negative fallout. It's a zero-sum game. The state schools stand to win these enrollments, gain these enrollments, and the private schools stand to lose them.
Mm-hmm.
I wish that the program could have been thought through so that there wasn't that binary outcome.
Yeah.
Maybe one way to approach it is to just try and increase graduation rates.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that you have to graduate in 4 years, many lower income students, lower income families, the statistics will show you that they typically would graduate, a higher percentage would graduate in 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of trying to increase graduation in 4 years, why don't we just try and grow graduation overall? Because it's only at about 50% from SUNY schools. So I don't think it was thought through well enough, isn't having a broad enough impact, and maybe isn't really addressing what the primary needs are for today's state resident students and families.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, you bring such an important point. Oops, sorry, I'm getting a little echoey here. That it's a question of, is it really positively impacting those that the whole scholarship is meant to be supporting our low income students? And you're bringing up these really important points that if students are questioning if it's the right fit for them, and there's all these kind of binds on them, and then it's turning around and impacting higher ed as a whole, hurting these private schools that are in New York, is not positively impacting higher ed as a whole. And it really does start to bring up the question of, if you start losing these important private schools, you may be losing spaces for low-income students, and that may in turn hurt just as many as it's intending to help. So I think it's really important, the points that you're making right now. And I know you had said a little bit about this, but I think it's interesting that private schools have the option to opt in, but with such caveats in place, I would be surprised if many private schools opted into that, with all those binds that you mentioned. Having to match it is one thing, but I know you've brought up some other points that make it debatable if it even is worthwhile for a private school to do it. But then I guess you also have to think about the fact of survival, which you said. So are there any other things that that you see as specifically impacting private schools beyond what you shared there?
Yeah, I think some of the private schools for next year will have the opportunity to look at their annual budget,
Mm-hmm.
and instead of just making yourself blanket available to have to match the tuition award, you could prepare next year's budget and say we're going to put $100,000 placeholder in here for Excelsior program students.
Mm-hmm.
You don't you Some schools are concerned that if all of the eligible students apply and they accepted all of those students, that it would just be unaffordable and drive bigger annual deficits.
Right.
But maybe with more time, you can come up with a strategic plan and say, look, if we get 50 students that apply to this school that are Excelsior program eligible, we should participate in that program so that maybe we have a chance of winning 15 of those students.
Mm-hmm.
When you're only admitting hundreds of students each year, every 10 or 15 students makes such a difference to the bottom line for these schools.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's an excellent point. And I do think that's important too, to be able to take a step and watch this actually take place, because this incoming class, like you shared earlier, it kind of happened too late to really get a sense of what that would look like budgetarily. But this year will be it will be an incredible amount of insight for those schools to be considering. But I mean, I work for a private school. I know what you mean. Those 5 to 10 to 15 students, that makes a difference. And when you're trying to make a decision that is going to impact your bottom line, but impact the incoming student body, and in having to weigh such important budgetary questions into consideration, it's an important thing to kind of be able to watch how it happens this year. So you brought up some really great points about the students earlier too, about questioning, is this actually meeting kind of low-income students that it's supposed to be serving where they're at? And I love your point about graduation rates and trying to increase those too, because I think you're bringing up some things that I think are important to have in that context, that some of these students do, finish the program in 6 years versus 4. And that's that many more years that if they take the scholarship, that they need to be in New York State. I know we also spoke a little bit about there's limited industries depending on what school they're going to too, right? So, there's only so many places, if a student's doing a certain degree, there's only so many places that they can work in the state, which I think is an important thing to bring up too. So, can you talk a little bit more about kind of whether it's really meeting lower income students where they're at?
I think the program itself may be actually targeting middle class families.
Yeah. Okay.
Families that have household income that precludes them from getting federal aid for all of the tuition, and this program will help them with that portion of the tuition that the student or family has to pay for. But it turns out that half of the 650,000 students currently attending a SUNY or CUNY are not eligible because their tuition is already covered. So I'm not at the margin. It's not clear to me how many more students are actually getting an opportunity that they otherwise wouldn't have had.
Interesting.
And this first year, it's all of the existing students enrolled at SUNYs and CUNYs that are applying, and that's all that the funding could even address. I think next year, you're right, we'll have more data to look at and understand how many students took advantage of it, how many fell out. But I think just by nature of all the eligibility requirements and how easy it is to fall out of eligibility is a problem in and of itself. It's very misleading to say free tuition at a SUNY school, because not that many people are going to be able to take advantage of it.
Right.
And the eligibility requirements, like you have to graduate in 4 years, you have to maintain a 30 credit workload. The people who need help can't meet those requirements. And that's why I feel like it wasn't well thought through, and maybe it will continue to be refined. There are about 10 states in the country that offer some kind of a free tuition program.
Mhm.
Um, some leading states like Georgia and Texas have had these state resident programs for years now, and they're constantly being tweaked every year to come closer to meeting what the primary objective is. So it's possible that the Excelsior program may get some of these tweaks as well. But the limitation that you have to stay and work in the state is going to cause some number of students that would be eligible to not apply for it, because their career may simply be they may have better luck advancing in their career working in a different state.
Mhm.
And this may not be a perfect example, but if you go to an engineering school in New York State and you want to be a petrochemical engineer, you're probably not going to stay in New York State to pursue your career, and you
Mhm.
wouldn't apply for the Excelsior program.
Wow. It's fascinating to see like what it aims for, and I'm hearing all of these bits and pieces that whittle away students that might actually end up having the scholarship. Like you said, it's going to be really interesting to see, like you pointed out, how many students were left with that actually utilize the scholarship in the end because of all these, oh well, I'm a student, I'm not going to do it because of this or because of that, or I don't qualify for it. I'm fascinated to see just the sort of whittling away of that big batch of students that initially could have qualified to wherever we land in May and June and July of next year.
So to that point, if you have 650,000 students in the SUNY CUNY program and you go through all of the eligibility requirements, you only come up with like 30,000 students. How could this be receiving so much fanfare when it's going to only potentially affect such a small group of the New York State students?
Yeah.
And so that's one of my biggest disappointments. My second biggest disappointment is we have wonderful private colleges in New York State, and we're putting them further at risk. And what we should be doing is helping bolster that public-private option, not only for New York State residents, but other out-of-state residents that may want to come to New York. That's better for the economy. Post-secondary education is a $400 billion business.
Mm-hmm.
And New York State would do well to continue to help that part of the economy that these private colleges bring to a lot of small towns across New York.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do. I have colleagues and friends at some of those private schools in New York, and it would really be a devastating thing to see something that is, well-intentioned at the top, at the start of it, trying to help students, but in the end, impacting students so negatively by pushing some of these schools aside, and in turn, whittling down some of the choices students have to be able to get a fantastic education in New York State. So yeah, it's interesting for it to get so much fanfare when in the end you're like, is this actually meeting what it's intending to meet? But
could you imagine graduating from a private school and at some point it doesn't exist anymore?
No, I can't. And I know that it's happened out there, and it's devastating every time. We saw Burlington College here in Burlington close a few years ago, and I had no association with them, and it's still devastating to see. I think it hurts higher ed every time a school closes, because it's less opportunities for students to find a fit for them, and it hurts that community. And I would hate to see that happen in New York, and at a bigger scale if it starts impacting a lot of private schools in a short amount of time.
We had it happen in New York with Dowling College on Long Island, and it has a terrible ripple effect. Mm-hmm. Not only does it disrupt the students, it disrupts the faculty, all the other people that had jobs supporting that college campus. And at the end, they wind up liquidating the real estate to developers, and it's going to take 5 or 10 years for that land use to even come to fruition. So it's something that should be avoided. And I don't think that I think many of these private colleges in New York are truly concerned. There are plenty of wealthy, big private schools in New York that are not going to be affected. But we have many schools in New York, dozens of schools with less than $50 million endowment and fewer than 2,000 students, and they're going to be at risk, I think.
Yeah. I'm hoping for their sake that they can ride out this upcoming kind of storm of all this, but it is concerning to see. So I'm crossing my fingers for everybody that we can navigate really using this program to serve the students it seeks to serve without it being at the detriment of other institutions. Are there other big misconceptions that you feel are out there about this program? You've addressed some of them, but anything else that we kind of haven't talked about that you feel like people don't understand what this program is, or what it can or can't do?
I think, for an example, Nicole, it would be if I'm going to college and I know I want to be a lawyer, but I want to go to a law school outside New York State. And people may not realize that there is a deferral. So if you are planning on going directly into graduate school, and you may not know if you're going to attend in-state or out-of-state, Nicole, I'm not sure if I'm still on air here, so I guess I'll keep talking. I don't see the video.
Joe, I'm so sorry. Sorry, viewers. Sorry, Joe hit a button by accident. I'm so sorry. Okay.
That's
Joe,
funny.
please pick me up where you were leaving off.
It's the deferral option was one of the things where I don't think people have all the information. If you're going to go directly to graduate school out of state, you would think, oh, well, now the program's going to be violated and convert to a loan. But it's not. You have the option to defer it to after graduate school.
Right.
And you can also defer it for 6 months also. So I think that's something that could be helpful to students that are thinking about grad school. The other is, the first applicants are a little bit a guinea pig. They have to go through the process first. And I think students who applied during the summer, like in June, and are feeling pretty good about attending and getting more aid, may have a little bit of anxiety here where they may not know, and at the same time are probably reporting for orientation. I think that some of those students are going to have to kind of work through the bursar's office at each of their schools and kind of get it figured out. And I don't think that they were really anticipating that. I don't think many students or families had kind of thought through that they may not get this processed in time, that their bill has to get satisfied.
Right. Yeah, it's a whole new kind of curveball to throw into that financial aid process, and that applying for all these different scholarships and things out there, having to work that into the process. And I appreciate, I didn't know that about the deferral component to it too. And I'm intrigued to see as the year rolls out how how new misconceptions come up and how they're addressed and how they're addressed to help to balance out the program to be better next year. But thank you for bringing some of those to light.
Yeah, Nicole, one other thing real quick. If maybe if in developing this program, they would have solicited some input,
Yeah.
then maybe they would have gotten more participation, more buy-in, and maybe some of these binding eligibility requirements could have been more flexible.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I think if you identify the objective and quantify the addressable market,
Mm-hmm.
really understand, well, what do state residents need? Because very clear from the data that if you attend a college, your future income opportunities are significantly greater. So how are we going to get more 18-year-old, which there were fewer 18-year-old high school graduates in New York, and it's not expected to increase. So all of the colleges in the U.S. are dealing with the fact that there are fewer 18-year-olds. Well, in New York, we have that problem as well.
Yeah.
So since they didn't get that input, I don't believe on the front end, I hope that they really do take some of the public input and debate about the program and show the flexibility to tweak the program as other states have. Because otherwise it's really a lot of fanfare about not much impact.
Absolutely. I actually have a question related to that, because that's a really great point of who's kind of brought into the conversation around how to build this in a way that actually benefits students. Who was part of the development of this program? Was anybody from higher ed part of the conversation, or was it really just at the governmental level? You know, do you have any more insight into that? Because I realize I don't know a lot about how it came together, other than maybe seeing some other states having similar programs. Can you give more insight?
I don't know who was involved in developing the program, but every admissions officer I speak to wasn't fully aware of it, and certainly wasn't solicited to provide any input. That's why I'm making the assumption that there really wasn't a lot of like a public input period.
Right.
Like the federal government would use a notice of proposed rulemaking, and they would get a lot of public input. So hopefully they're going to open it up and do that, or just rethink the objective, because I don't think it's the middle class families that are the big enough addressable market for who's going to be eligible for it to matter as much. Really, for post-secondary education, the challenge we have is we're not preparing young people for the workforce, and maybe we should be focused on that, so that not only is it career education, but it's also job training, and that would have helped New York State as well. When you graduate from a state university in New York, and you're required to stay in state for the number of years you received aid, there's really only one city in the whole state that has a higher earning opportunity, but it also has a much higher expense and less affordability. So the idea of having to stay in New York for 4 years when you only have one really big city to be attracting talent may be just too binding for too many people.
No, that's an excellent point. While we're moving forward with seeing if there's any questions out there, we're kind of nearing the end of our time together. I want to remind viewers that if you have questions for Joe, please use the hashtag HigherEdLive, and I will ask him. But Joe, your response to that last question really makes me wonder, because you're a smart guy, and you're bringing forth just these really great points and great insight on this program. So I'm curious if this the program went forward in a way that you think would most benefit New York as a whole, and you've brought up some great points, maybe job training is built into this, what changes or what updates to the program would you like to see that you think would help it better serve the students it seeks to serve?
I'd like to see it address room and board. That's part of the cost of a college education that's preventing more students from taking advantage of a full-time on-campus college experience. We have lots of programs available for tuition. You could put all this money into an existing one of those programs as opposed to creating a new program that isn't really going to affect enough people at the margin to matter. So I think room and board is a big area that is going unaddressed that could really impact a number of students and families. I also think that, as I mentioned earlier, we should, part of our GDP in New York State includes these private colleges. And we shouldn't be rolling out these programs at their expense or their disadvantage. It doesn't bother me if New York State is a net exporter of talent. One of our great products in New York State is education. And many times when you're an exporter of young college graduates, there's a good chance that they may come back and bring more value. So I'm not sure that I would constrain it in that way that you have to remain a resident. So I would make some big tweaks to the program and put more dollars to work.
I love that. And I appreciate that you kind of seem to have a pride of like, yeah, we export great talent, let's not hurt that. And let's think of a better way to be able to make sure this serves everybody better. I really appreciate your insight on that, Joe. Thank you. I don't see any questions coming in right now. So folks may be checking this show out in the archives later as well, or on the podcast. So I may be sending people your way soon, Joe, to be able to pick your brain a little bit more about this. But, and of course, like I said, some folks might already be watching the eclipse, so I hope everybody protects their eyes out there. But Joe, as we kind of wrap things up today, any last, I don't know, insights or, things that maybe let's end it on a positive note. Let's look at, what are you excited that the program is doing, whether it's bringing around conversation around higher ed or anything else. What are you excited about, and what do you hope continues for the program?
I always like to find the silver lining, and I think for many of the private schools in New York State that just need that another kickstart or some incentive to be more innovative, that maybe this program is something that's going to make these private schools develop something more strategic, so that they can not only fulfill the existing students and future students, but all those shoulders that everyone stands on that came before them.
Right.
It really pains me, the idea to graduate from a college that one day won't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So if nothing else, maybe this competitive issue now with the Excelsior program and the state university system is something that's going to make some private schools move into action sooner. You can't, business as usual is not going to work. And you have to go with your strengths. And sometimes you may have to pool your resources so that the smaller schools can compete on a cost scale with the bigger schools.
That's an excellent point. And yeah, I guess the silver lining in any difficulty we've had in the last few years, whether it be a program like this or new test scores or coalition app or all these other things, is it challenges us as an organization and as at the institute, or not institutional level, but at the higher ed level, to be more innovative. And like you said, it's not business as usual anymore. We really need to be thinking differently and acting differently and being better with our resources, to keep ourselves relevant and out there and competitive in this market. But I hope you're right. I hope that the private schools can continue to pull through with all this. I hope that it benefits students the way it intends, and I hope that New York State can pay attention to how it goes this year and hopefully make kind of course correct as we go along. So I'll try to be hopeful, as it sounds like you are as well, and we'll see how everything gets impacted this upcoming year.
Thanks, Nicole. I really appreciate and enjoyed being on the program.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joe. It's a pleasure having you on here as well. And I encourage any viewers to reach out to you as a Karl Marx Advisors partner. And I'll make sure people, if you reach out to me, if you tweet at the Higher Ed Live Twitter handle or at my own Twitter handle, which is mlentini, I'd be happy to connect you with Joe. So thanks again, Joe, for being on the show today. And
I'll follow up and send you some links for information that some of the viewers may benefit from, just some concise pieces out there. And we'll stay in touch.
Perfect. And I will gladly share that with everybody. I'll be tweeting those out a little bit later today. So thank you to our viewers. Thanks as always to our program sponsors and our CCUA and M Stoner. Thank you all for your patience when I disappeared momentarily and came back. It was a pleasure chatting with you all today. Thanks again, Joe. And have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.